Hello, this is Dave from PC Gamer, and today we're talking about the new AMD Ryzen processors.
Hi, I'm Alan Dexter. I'm the senior hardware.
Oh, so we're doing titles, aren't we?
Well, I thought I would.
All right.
I thought that would be good. Hi, I'm Alan Dexter. I'm a senior hardware editor. I can't say my own job title.
Go on, do it again. You can just say, I'm Alan. We'll say...
Hi, I'm Alan Dexter, and I've been looking at the 5900X and the 5800X from AMD.
Okay, so those are the chips that we've been testing. There are, there's a whole bunch of them coming out at launch, though, aren't there?
Yeah, there's actually another two. There's the 5950X and the 5600X, but we're not getting those until launch day.
Okay, so that's top and tailing it. So that's like the 16-core, 32-thread monster chip. Is that like $800 or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 800. And then the 5600X, that's the only one that comes with a cooler, but we'll come back to that in a minute.
But that's kind of like that's the super interesting sort of like super gamey mainstreamy one. But what we've actually been testing is the 12-core and the 8-core, isn't it?
Yeah, and which are a bit strange really for gamers because there are no games that use 12-core 24-thread chips right now. Even 8-core 16-thread is kind of, you'll do well to use all that resource. So, yeah. But you could look at the 12-core 24-thread as having legs. It's going to be around for a while. I think the 16-core 32-thread one, it costs basically 50% more. And it's a bit silly. It's a bit specialised. So you can kind of ignore that for gaming.
So are AMD doing the same sort of thing they did with the original 3000 series chips in that the higher up the stack, the higher frequency you get? So I think originally they were talking about like the 3950X is just like, it's their best gaming chip because it's the highest core count, it's the highest frequency, it's the fastest processor. Is that still the same situation? They've
done that a little bit. I mean, there is a difference this time around in that in their own literature they've focused more on the 5900X just because they haven't quite done that 3080 thing where they've made it the kind of the mainstream kind of halo product, as it were. The 5950, the figures, they're still out there a little bit, but they've focused more on the 5900X in their own kind of stuff. Because we haven't got it yet, we don't quite know how it performs because frequencies they're not set in stone a lot of the time when it comes to these new chips. They move around a lot thanks to such things as precision boost, but yeah.
Lovely stuff. So what have you been seeing out of the 5900X, like in terms of clock speeds? What have you been regularly sort of like seeing?
It's a bit weird. So it's rated as a 3.7 gigahertz CPU base clock, boosting up to 4.8, which is, it's slightly down on the base clock from the 3900X. But it's a slightly higher boost. But what actually happens is you don't really see either of those numbers at any point. When you're using all cores, you hit about 4.2 I was getting, without overclocking shenanigans. But it peaked single core on 4.95 gig, which is way above 4.8, which is kind of interesting. It's nice because there were a lot of problems with 3000 series to actually hit some of the numbers, some of the boost clocks AMD was claiming. And this time around, they've lowballed it a little bit, which makes it interesting. It means that you feel you're getting your money's worth.
Okay, that's nice. So like there are times where it's actually just pulling in like higher clock speeds just to get the job done, I guess.
I mean, there is a reason for this as well, and that is the cooler. On the 3000 series, the 3900X, it came with a cooler, and that was possibly holding it back a little bit. There is no cooler to hold anything back now, so you're going to slap a fairly serious water cooler on a $550 CPU, so which we have done for testing. I
mean, but did anybody really actually test the Ryzen 3000 series chips with that cooler? I think we all just jammed like water cooling coolers on there just to make sure we got the highest clock speeds we could. They still
that was still couldn't do it a lot of the time, but yeah. So yeah, it's good news this time around. You will actually hit the clock speeds that they say quite a lot of the time as well.
So this is Zen 3 though, isn't it? This is a whole new process of design for AMD, isn't it, compared to the Zen 2 stuff? So what is actually new with Zen 3?
On paper, when you initially look at it, Zen 2 to Zen 3 looks like a fairly evolutionary step, but it's not. It's actually a complete redesign from the ground up.
Revolution, not evolution.
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
But it is, and they're claiming a 19% IPC improvement, which is really important. That's really important for games, and we'll come back to that in a second.
That's that's a hell of a bump as well, isn't it?
It's huge. I mean, that's the thing with Zen though. Each generation it's been pretty incredible, but Zen 2 to Zen 3, 90% is just like, okay, they've brought out the big guns now. I think Zen Plus to Zen 2 was 15%,
right,
thereabouts. So, and that was pretty good, because you look at Intel, less than 10% for the last few generations. So AMD really is storming ahead, and
that's all been on clock speed as well. Like,
they
basically
exactly.
bumped up IPC by just raising the clock speed. I guess the thing here is so like IPC, the instructions per clock. That's the thing that basically makes a single core, which most of our games will generally sort of like prioritize as the thing that makes them go fast. And it's all that single core, single threaded performance that like the IPC increase is really giving us the benefits, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even in a game that's really quite well threaded, that it does lots of things at the same time, there's still one core that basically drives everything forward. So the fact that AMD has managed to knock out this, basically a 20% improvement, means that games just run quicker. And from testing, that's absolutely true. That's what we're seeing. It's as an example, F1 2019, which is a game we've got lots of numbers for and we've used for a while. It genuinely has a 20% performance increase over the 3900X, 3900 XT actually, which was a slightly faster version of the 3900X that released this summer. And that's some games not quite such a big increase, and that 19% that AMD is quoting is actually, it's essentially they've taken a 3900X and they've taken a 5900X at 4 gigahertz, pushed it through loads of benchmarks, and on average that is the increase they're seeing. So
that's a clock for clock.
That's clock for clock. Yeah, that's
so in terms of this is this 19% IPC increase is that's the headline figure. But how have they managed to get to that? What's actually changed inside the chips themselves?
There's lots of clever stuff that happes. We'll just put it as magic at this point.
It's mostly magic. It's like when you're talking about these tiny little transistors in these chips, which are just beyond the vision of most normal humans. Like. Yeah. It's practically magic now, right?
It is practically magic. There's prefetch improvements, back ends, front ends, loads, stores, all of that kind of stuff. There's improvements there. The main thing, though, is they've changed the actual configuration of the chips. In Zen 2, you had CCXs, core complexes.
So these are all the chiplet stuff, right?
This is the chiplet stuff. Back in Zen 2, you would have core complexes, CCXs, that would have 4 cores in it. Sharing 16 megabytes of cache. And you'd have 2 of those in a CCD, so making 8 cores altogether. In Zen 3, you just have 8 cores all sharing 32 megabytes of cache. And this is a biggie because games like fast access to memory and cache. So that it sounds the same, 4 plus 4 equals 8. So it must be the same. And it's got the same amount of cache, but actually no. Changing how that works alone is probably the biggest improvements to how AMD has worked its magic.
That's kind of interesting because the whole chiplet thing was about moving away from the monolithic architecture that Intel uses. So they jam all their cores into one sort of like essential sort of like die space, whereas AMD, to sort of like get past pricing and stuff, they to make it affordable to mass produce these stuff, they created lots of little chips inside one big die, and now they're sort of like squeezing them together to get performance. So they're almost like coming back again.
They admitted they didn't realise the impact that the amount of cache would make on the overall performance as far as games are concerned, because it's not obvious that that's how games work, but it turns out, yes, games like a big chunk of cache, and they want all the cores to be able to access that.
Don't we all?
Yes, exactly. Oh, and the other thing is a big improvement is how efficient the new cores are. The new structure allows for cores that aren't being used to be turned off completely, which is so they don't downclock them, they don't undervolt them or anything like that. They literally turn them off. So they sit. You can see this. They sit at 0 megahertz. It's like they don't exist, and that gives the overall chip, more room to push the cores that it needs faster and harder, which is where we get the big numbers from and the great.
Is this also what's going to make them like really, really stellar on the mobile side of things as well when you stick them into laptops?
Absolutely. But although they don't talk about unreleased products, so no one's mentioned that as well.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So is this still 7nm, or is this 7nm plus or plus? We're not doing any of that stuff, are we?
This is the same process that they introduced with Zen 2, but it is slightly optimized, not from a production process kind of thing, purely from that TSMC and AMD have talked and worked out the best way of using the process that they have.
I guess they kind of like it's kind of manufacturing optimizations, isn't it? It's like it's got older now. It's like it's matured. They've got slightly different tooling so that they can make these chips more better more regularly. So like I guess there's always some sort of wastage, whereas I guess this version of 7nm is going to be about as efficient to produce as they can probably get right now.
Yeah. I mean they've called it an enhancement internally, or it's that same thing.
But okay, well let's talk. That's all the specs then. So that's all the nuts and bolts. But what does that actually mean in terms of raw CPU performance?
It's pretty impressive. It's lovely. It's really good. I know.
You sound like giggly.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah,
it's lovely.
No, the performance is really good. There's two parts to this. AMD was already pretty much destroying Intel in serious applications anyway. It has more cores. It's more efficient. There's a lot to like.
Yeah, it's multi-core, multi-thread performance. Has just like it's especially for the money. It's just impossible to beat. You just can't like why if you're making a professional setup and you need something that's going to give you decent CPU performance, why the hell would you go anything else?
Lovely. And then the other side of this is gaming, obviously. AMD came out saying that they were now going to be the best for gaming. Haven't quite seen that.
So not quite the stellar gaming lead they were touting.
Some games they are faster, some games they were slower. Assassin's Creed Odyssey, they said at the beginning this is the worst case scenario in a way, and I think it's 7 frames a second slower. But overall, get rid of the outliers a little bit. They're now the same,
right?
And that's huge. Intel is no longer the gaming king. It can't say that anymore because it's not consistent enough. There's plenty of games where that's just not true, or they're within 1 or 2% of each other. So
I guess that's the thing. That was their last sort of like holdout, wasn't it? It's just like we can still say our Intel have got the best gaming processors. We can still hold on to that, can't we? And then like that's not it now. They can't claim any outright lead.
Yeah, and which is sad for Intel. Hopefully it will kick them up the bum a bit, and they'll actually do something interesting with Rocket Lake. Well,
that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, they've already come out and claimed some sort of IPC performance leads for Rocket Lake. Oh my god, that's going to be a continual confusion, isn't it? I'm going to keep saying Rocket League whenever I talk about Rocket Lake.
I'm going to say it as well.
Jeez, but Rocket Lake is meant to be. I can't remember what the actual figures were. Was that like 12% IPC increase?
Which would actually be enough to pull it back for them. But AMD can't really go up against something that's not released yet, so I think that's fine. I think they've shown that by getting up to that level of Intel now, I think that's really exciting, and it means right now until we get Rocket Lake, you don't have to pick a chip based on how it games because they all game really well. So
right, so you're not sitting there going, okay, well, do I want lots of cores or do I want something that's really good at games? Now you can have both.
Yeah, exactly, and that's where the 5900X really wins out, because the 3900X was a really good chip, but the gaming was a bit off the pace. 5900X is now like, well, you can do all this. You can be serious. You can render. You can do videos. And you can also play and not lose any frames at all, which is...
So why would anybody buy an Intel chip right now?
Well, there is one thing, and that's price, because AMD's it's no longer in Intel's shadow, I think is a nice way of looking at it. They've come out, they've gone, oh no, we are better now, so we're going to charge you for that. So the only reason you would not pick an AMD at the moment is because some of them are too expensive. So as you go down Intel stack, they begin to look like quite good value for money, because AMDs are now $50 more expensive. So it's like, yeah, I might go for Intel here. And no one's going to hold that against you. If you 10700K is still a really good chip. It's just like
So
10900K less so, but yeah.
This is kind of like, and then like 10400F becomes a really impressive gaming chip.
Absolutely.
So this is a real switch around then, isn't it? Because like Intel historically was like top chips, highest performance, most expensive. AMD with the little guys, where they were competing at the mainstream and delivering a lot for the money. Whereas now it's kind of like the other way around. AMD are the sort of like the Halo products, the high end, high price, high performance stuff, whereas Intel are going to be left sort of like scraping around in the mainstream, hoping that they can pick up some sales in that area.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is an absolutely intriguing kind of how that switched in so few generations. We knew Zen was looking good, and the fact that they've just overtaken Intel and put Intel as the kind of the budget solution is like, okay, couldn't see that coming.
AMD have been continually innovating, improving, like moving forward, whereas Intel have just been stuck. Mostly down to manufacturing issues. Yeah. Sure, I think that's kind of widely known. The 10 nanometer process was a real struggle for them to get any processors that were actually performing at decent frequencies. 7 nanometers got its own issues for them as well. So they've kind of been stuck with the same 14 nanometer Skylake architecture, which they released 2015 was it? Something like that. So I guess they've been still stuck on this same architecture for a long while.
Yeah, I mean they've done really well with it, to be fair. I mean, it's the fact they've managed to get 5.3 gigahertz out of it on the 10900K is like good work. And you've got to wonder where they would be if they actually had a decent process at this point.
Yeah, if they'd been able to continue iterating at the same sort of level. Yeah, I guess I suppose that's the thing. It's like you've still got to give props to a 14 nanometer architecture that is as good as a 7 nanometer architecture from today when it was essentially created 5 years ago. Yeah, so that's the level. So is that how Intel comes back from this then?
I think they absolutely have to. I don't think there's any way we will see anything substantial out of 14 nanometer. I mean, we will have to see because Rocket Lake, is that still 14 nanometer?
So Rocket Lake is 14 nanometer, but it's using the same core architecture which they introduced with the Ice Lake generation, which was 10 nanometers. So it's using the same core architecture from a 10 nanometer chip, backporting it down to a 14 nanometer architecture. So it'll have slightly higher efficiencies, but won't have the same level of efficiencies that Ice Lake delivered. But because the 14 nanometer process is very mature, it's incredibly mature right now. It's positively geriatric. You're looking at something that could end up with really high clock speeds, as well as a really high sort of like core architecture boost as well. So I don't know, like Rocket Lake could be potentially exciting. The weird thing with that though is that while Comet Lake, which was the last Intel architecture, still on the same Skylake original design, still 14 nanometer, but they'd managed to get up to 10 cores and 20 threads, sort of like trying to sort of like play the core count battle with AMD. But with Rocket Lake, that's going back down again. So the top chip in the Rocket Lake stack is going to be 8 cores and 16 threads, which is going to be like 2 tiers lower than AMD can manage, which is kind of an interesting switch around.
AMD just owns serious applications at that point because it's got the threads. And the other thing as well is that, yeah, Intel's doing really well on the frequencies. But AMD's achieving similar performance at, 4.9 gig peaking, 4.8 a lot of the time, maybe 4.7. So AMD is just in a different game completely. And if they want to, 6 months' time, if they want to release an XT variation of these cores, slightly tweaked, running slightly faster, where that Intel's in a bad place then. So it doesn't feel like AMD's completely spent on what it can do with this architecture. There's lots of room there. So yeah, I wouldn't want to be Intel right now. They've got a long, hard look at themselves to work out how they go forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're taking big risks. Like this is the thing. It's like 2021 is going to be a big old roll of the dice for Intel. They're putting out Rocket Lake at the start. They've announced that's going to be first quarter. So Rocket Lake's coming out in the first quarter. which is taking a risk, backporting a 10 nanometer architecture to 14 nanometer, and hoping that the IPC boost pays off and gives them a bit of a gaming lead, because that's all they're going to be able. That it looks like that's what they're trying to claw back, just so they can again say that we've got the best gaming chips. And then the second half of the year, we're going to see Alder Lake, which is another freaking lake, 8 small cores, 8 big cores, and hoping that they can have the run that sort of like fine tightrope walk between performance and multi-threaded applications. I think it's a real gamble. 2021 is going to be real interesting.
That is a gamble. I think it's hard to tell. I kind of get the big little thing as far as mobile is concerned, because there's things you can do with efficiencies with that and how cores work, because we know this from ARM, and it works quite well. As far as desktop processors, I'm just not convinced, but we will see, I guess.
If they can get a hardware scheduler that makes all that essentially invisible to Windows, that hardware scheduler is going to be the absolute key. If they can get that working, then Alder Lake becomes like a real consideration. If they're still scrabbling around having to make per game, per sort of like application tweaks and updates to things to actually get them to work on the big little design, then it's going to be masses amounts of bother.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a gamble, but they've got to do something, and that's probably their best bet right now.
Okay, so we're saying now that Zen 3 is if you're building a gaming PC, this is essentially the one you go for. So which of the chips, if you're building a gaming PC right now, which of these chips do you go for? Which of these chips are you buying?
I am utterly blown away by the 5900X. I don't want to sound like a AMD fanboy by any stretch, but it's a really bloody good chip.
Zen 3 is making you an AMD fanboy right now.
It is a bit, actually, to be honest. I mean, Zen's been pretty good since Zen Plus, really. Original Zen was a bit ropey at times. Zen Plus fixed a few things. Zen 2 sorted out the memory, so it's really efficient, just works. This, I literally plugged it into an existing X570 motherboard. It worked. Plugged in some memory. It worked. It just worked. Everything works. It's ridiculously fast. Loads of cores. It's a brilliant CPU. It's what you want to build a machine around. Superman would build a machine around.
Nice. All right. Okay. What about Batman? Like, I mean, to be honest, Superman building a PC. Yeah, we've seen him do it. I'm not impressed. Which chip would Michael Keaton use?
Oh, probably a 6800 from 20 years.
Well, okay. Well, thanks for enlightening us on the Zen 3 stuff, Alan. So yeah, now we know. Intel's in trouble. AMD is firmly in the lead, whether it's gaming or more creative applications. AMD's got the goods.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been great talking to you, Dave.